certain about this?
My mom told me she had ordered a 5-tier cake. I want you to picture the moment. We were standing in her kitchen in early June. I was 25 years old. I was getting married in 11 weeks. She was wearing one of her good aprons and stirring a pot of something on the stove that I had not been paying close attention to, because she had just casually mentioned, in the middle of a sentence about something else, that the cake was going to be 5 tiers and that the bakery was Petriana's, the same one she had used for her sister's 50th birthday, and that the deposit had already been made. I had not asked for a 5-tier cake. I had not picked Petriana's. The cake I had wanted, which my fiancé Matteo and I had picked out together at a small bakery in Brooklyn that we had been driving to from our apartment in Queens on weekends for the previous year, had been a small 2-tier almond cake with a fresh raspberry filling. The cake we had wanted had cost $450. The cake my mother had just told me she had ordered, at Petriana's, would have been at least $4,200. I want you to remember that number. The cake was the first detail I noticed. I was supposed to ask my mom about the budget. I knew that. The wedding had been her idea, mostly. She had offered, when Matteo and I had announced our engagement 6 months earlier, to pay for the entire thing. She had said it casually, sitting on the couch in their living room, the way some moms offer to pick up a check at lunch. She had said the number was $35,000. She had said it twice, looking at my dad, who had nodded. She had said it again on the phone 2 weeks later, after I had asked her if she was sure, and she had told me, in the voice she used when she wanted to sound certain about something she had already decided, that I was their daughter, and that they had been saving for years, and that they wanted to do this for us. My fiancé and I had budgeted around her offer. We had picked the venue. We had paid the deposit on it ourselves, which was $3,000, with the understanding that my mom would reimburse us. She had not reimbursed us yet. The deposit had been paid 5 months earlier. Every time I had asked about it, she had said the check was coming. The check had not come. The deposit had stayed on my credit card. When she told me about the 5-tier cake at Petriana's, I should have asked her about the deposit. I should have asked her about the budget she had committed to. I should have asked her about the difference between the cake we had picked and the cake she had ordered. I did not. I stood in her kitchen, watching her stir the pot on the stove, and I felt the small, specific feeling I had felt many times in my life around my mother, which was the feeling that there was a conversation I was supposed to be having that I was not allowed to have, because she had already decided what the conversation was going to be, and the only role I was being offered was the role of the daughter who said yes. I said nothing about the cake. I want to tell you what I learned 3 weeks later, when my younger sister Liora announced she was pregnant, and what my mother decided to do with the money she had told me 6 months earlier was being saved for my wedding. There are people listening to this who have a sister who has been the favored child for as long as you can remember, and a mother who has been making decisions about the family budget without telling you what those decisions are, and a moment when you finally figured out that the saving had not been for you. I want to tell you what I figured out and what I quietly did about it, and what happened 10 years later in a closing office in upstate New York, when my parents walked in thinking they were the buyers. Before I do, hit subscribe, and tell me one thing in the comments. Tell me about the moment you realized that what your family had been telling you had been put aside for you was actually being put aside for somebody else. Tell me how old you were. Tell me what they said when you finally noticed. Tell me whether you said anything back, or whether you, like me, said nothing for a long time. I read every single comment. Now let me take you back to the day my sister called my mother to tell her about the pregnancy, because that day is when the saving for my wedding stopped existing. My name is Yelena Berenson. I am 35 years old. I am a paintings conservator at a small private studio in New York City. I work with old oil paintings, mostly from the 18th and 19th centuries, that have been damaged by time, neglect, or accidents. My job is to make decisions about how to bring a damaged painting back without changing what the painting was originally trying to be. The work has taught me a lot about restraint. The work has taught me a lot about waiting. I have spent the last 10 years quietly doing both of those things in my own life, in a way that has been informed by the small skills I learned restoring paintings, and I want to tell you the story of what I did with the waiting. My sister Liora is 2 years younger than me. She has been the favored daughter for as long as I have been able to remember. I do not say this with bitterness. I say it because the favoritism was so consistent, so visible to everybody in our extended family, that nobody had ever pretended otherwise. My mother had told me, when I was 11, that she loved both of us equally, but that Liora was easier. She had said this casually, as if the word easier were a neutral word. The word had not been neutral. The word had been a verdict. Liora had been pretty in the way some women in our family were pretty, and that I had not been. She had been more social. She had been more comfortable in the rooms my mother liked. She had married, at 23, a man named Jasper Holloway, who came from a family my mother had been trying to be friends with for 2 decades, and who had given my mother, in marrying Liora, the social entry point she had been waiting for since we had moved to our small lakeside town in upstate New York when I was 8. The pregnancy was announced on a Tuesday in late June. Liora called my mother. My mother screamed with happiness on the phone, the way some mothers scream. My mother called me 3 days later to tell me the news. She told me, in passing, that the baby was due in February. She told me Liora and Jasper had decided to throw a baby shower in October. She told me, almost as an afterthought, that she had decided she wanted to host it. I want to tell you what my mother said next. She said it in a voice that suggested she had been thinking about it for a long time and had been preparing me to hear it. She said, "Yelena, Liora is asking for the kind of shower we have not done for anybody in this family before. 8 months pregnant, big party. She wants it at the Gables. She wants the orchestra. She wants Petriana's. She wants the full thing. We are going to do it. We have been saving." The Gables was a small estate venue outside town that hosted high-end events. The orchestra was a chamber group that played at most of the family weddings my mother had attended in our area. Petriana's was the bakery she had ordered my 5-tier cake from. I asked my mother how much the shower was going to cost. She told me they had budgeted around $50,000. I want you to remember that number too. $50,000 for the shower, plus $35,000 for my wedding, would have been $85,000 in family wedding-related events that summer and fall. I asked my mother where the money was coming from. She did not answer the question directly. She told me she and my dad had been saving. She told me they had been saving for several specific things over the last few years. She told me the savings were going to stretch. The conversation ended without me getting a clear answer. I did not push. I never pushed. A week later, Liora called me. She told me the shower was now going to be at the Gables. She told me they had decided to do the orchestra. She told me they had decided to bring in a company to do an installation of fresh flowers across the entire main hall. She told me they had decided to give every guest a small gift bag with a bottle of champagne, a custom candle, and a piece of jewelry from a designer my mother had been trying to befriend. She told me, with the casual pride of a woman whose life was being arranged for her by people who had been arranging it her whole life, that the budget had grown to $180,000. She told me this on the phone. She told me as if I would be happy for her. She did not connect the number to anything else in our family. I did the math in my head while she was talking. The wedding budget my mother had committed to was $35,000. The deposit on the venue, which was sitting on my credit card, was $3,000. The cake at Petriana's, which my mother had unilaterally ordered, would have been around $4,200. The total wedding spending committed to so far had been about $7,000. The shower, by Liora's number, was now $180,000. The shower was about to cost more than 5 times what the wedding was going to cost. My mother had been telling me, for 6 months, that they had been saving for my wedding. She had also been telling me, in the same conversations, that they had been saving for several specific things. She had not told me, at any point in any of those conversations, that one of the specific things had been the shower. She had decided to do the shower 3 weeks earlier. The shower had not been part of the original plan. The shower had displaced something. I was beginning to suspect what the something was. I called my mom that night. I asked her about the wedding budget. I asked her, very calmly, whether the money she had committed to my wedding was still committed. There was a long pause on the phone. Then she said, "Yelena, sweetheart, we need to have a conversation about the wedding. Your dad and I have been thinking about it. We have been thinking we need to scale things back. The shower has been a much bigger commitment than we anticipated. We do not have the cash flow we thought we did. We are wondering if you and Mateo could maybe pay for the wedding yourselves. We can help with a small contribution. We can probably do 5,000. We just cannot do 35 anymore. I sat on my bed in my apartment in Queens. I held the phone. I did not say anything for almost 20 seconds. My mother said, "Yelena, are you there? Did you hear me?" I said yes. I told her I had heard her. I told her I would think about it. I told her I would call her back. I hung up. I called Mateo. He was working late. He had been an architect at a small firm in Manhattan. He was at a job site when I called. He could hear me trying not to cry. He told me he was coming home immediately. He came home an hour later. He held me on the couch while I told him what had happened. Mateo and I had a long conversation that night. He told me, very gently, that he was not surprised. He told me he had been suspicious about my mother's commitment for months. He told me he had been waiting to see if she would do the thing she had just done. He told me, in the kind of voice he uses when he has been thinking about something carefully, that the wedding could be smaller, and that he would prefer a smaller wedding anyway, and that we could pay for it ourselves with the money we had been saving for the down payment on a future apartment. He told me we could be married either way. We had a small wedding. We paid for it ourselves. The total cost was $11,400. We had 40 guests. The cake was a 2-tier almond cake from the small bakery in Brooklyn that we had been driving to. The cake cost $450. My parents came to the wedding. They sat at the parents' table. My mother gave a small toast. My father gave a smaller one. They both cried during the ceremony. The crying had felt, in the moment, like a kind of apology, and I had let myself believe it might have been one. The shower for Liora was held 3 weeks after the wedding. I went. The shower was beautiful. The flowers were extraordinary. The orchestra played for the entire afternoon. The cake was from Petriana's. The cake was a 6-tier white cake with sugar flowers cascading down one side. I sat at a small table near the back with Mateo. I watched my mother glow at the front of the room. I watched her introduce Liora to the women she had been wanting to befriend for 2 decades. I watched my father stand at the bar with Jasper's father, drinking a small glass of bourbon, looking like a man who had finally arrived in the room he had always wanted to be in. I want to tell you what I felt at that shower. I did not feel rage. I want to be honest about that. I had felt something colder and quieter and more useful. I had felt, for the first time in my life, a clarity about what my family was, and about what my role in it had been, and about what my role was going to be from there forward. I had felt a clarity that could only have come from sitting at a small table at the back of a room that had cost $180,000, while the room my mother had committed $35,000 to, 3 weeks earlier, had been a room I had paid for myself. The clarity was not bitter. The clarity was clean. I did not say anything at the shower. I had a small piece of cake. I told Liora I was happy for her. I drove back to Queens with Mateo that night. I went to work the next morning at the conservation studio. I did not bring it up with my mother. I did not bring it up with my sister. I want to tell you what I did over the next 10 years, because the 10 years are the rest of the story. I went back to my work. I had been a junior conservator at the studio for 2 years at that point. I was 25. The studio was a small, well-respected place with a senior conservator, a man named Iosif Kovalenko, who had taken me under his wing when I had first joined, and who had been patient with me in a way my own father had never been. Iosif had taught me how to read a painting carefully, how to take my time before I made any decision about what to restore and what to leave alone. He had taught me a phrase I still think about almost every day. He had told me that the great mistake in conservation work is to do too much, too fast, before you have understood what the painting is actually asking you to do. He had told me that most people, when they look at damage, want to fix it immediately, because the damage makes them uncomfortable. The work, he had told me, is to sit with the damage, to look at it for a long time, to understand what kind of damage it is, before you reach for any tools. I had taken his advice into my work. I had also, eventually, started to take it into the rest of my life. I started saving. Mateo and I had a careful household budget. I worked extra hours when I could. We did not have children for a long time. We saved aggressively. By the time I was 30, I had been promoted to senior conservator. My salary had doubled. We had a small apartment we had bought in Astoria. We had paid off my student loans. We had started saving for a specific purpose I had not told my parents about. The specific purpose was a house on Lake Mirror. I want to tell you about Lake Mirror because it is the part of the story that mattered most to my parents, and that became, over the 10 years, the thing I was quietly working toward. Lake Mirror is a small lake in the Adirondack region of upstate New York, about 3 hours from where I had grown up. My parents had been talking about buying a vacation home on Lake Mirror for as long as I had been alive. The lake had been my mother's lake. She had grown up summering there at her own grandmother's small cottage, which had been sold out of the family in the 1980s when my great-grandmother died. My mother had been talking, since I was small, about buying back into Lake Mirror. The buying back had been the project. The savings had been, in her telling, for the lake. I had heard about Lake Mirror at family dinners my whole childhood. I had heard about specific houses on the lake that had come on the market. I had heard about the cottage my mother had grown up in, which had been on a particular bend of the shoreline, and which had been bought by a doctor from Albany in 1984, and which had not come back on the market in the 4 decades since. When I was 32, the doctor's house on Lake Mirror came on the market. I want you to understand. Not a similar house. Not a house in the same neighborhood. The same exact house. The cottage my great-grandmother had owned. The one my mother had spent her childhood summers in. The one she had been talking about buying back since I had been a child. The asking price was $890,000. The market in the Adirondack region had been hot for several years. The doctor's family had owned it for 41 years. They had renovated it 3 times. The house was in good condition. I had heard about the listing through a real estate alert I had set up for the area. I had been monitoring the area for almost 6 years by that point. I had been waiting for this exact house to come on the market. I had not told my mother I had been watching. I had not told anybody. I called my agent the morning the listing went up. I asked her to put in an offer the same day. I offered $920,000. The offer was accepted within 48 hours, on the condition of an inspection contingency, which we waived after a clean inspection report came back 10 days later. The closing was scheduled for 45 days out. I had not told my mother, I had not told my sister, I had not told my father, I had not told anybody in my extended family. The only people who had known were Mateo, my agent, and my lawyer. I want to tell you what my mother had been doing during those same 6 years, because the parallel matters. My mother had been telling everybody she was finally going to buy back the house on Lake Mirror. She had been telling them since the year my dad retired, which was when I had been 30. She had been telling family at holidays. She had been telling friends at her social club. She had been telling the women at her bridge group. The buying back had become a kind of personal myth in her social life. She had even, I would learn later from Liora, been telling people specific things about the house that she could not have known were true unless she had been talking to a real estate agent. She had been talking to a real estate agent. She had been talking to one, in fact, on and off, for almost 3 years. She had been asking him to alert her if the doctor's house ever came on the market. She had been telling him she was prepared to make a competitive offer. What my mother had not been doing during those same 3 years was actually saving the money. She and my father had not been saving for the lake house at all. They had spent $50,000 on a renovation of their own kitchen the previous year. They had spent another $40,000 on a new car for my father's retirement. They had been spending freely on small luxuries. The savings my mother had been describing to her friends, for years, had been somewhere between aspirational and fictional. She had been telling the world a story about who she was going to be when the house came on the market. When the doctor's house came on the market, actually my mother panicked. She had called her real estate agent immediately. Her agent had told her, on the phone, that there was already an offer in. Her agent had told her the offer was strong. He had asked her if she wanted to put in a competing offer. My mother had said yes, she had wanted to. He had asked her how much she could put down. She had given him a number. The number had been less than half of what was in my offer. He had told her, gently, that the seller's agent was unlikely to entertain a counteroffer at that level. My mother had not given up. She had spent the next 2 weeks calling everybody she knew, asking for personal loans. She had called my sister. My sister had told her she did not have the kind of cash my mother was describing. My sister had told her, more honestly, that Jasper would not approve of giving her parents that kind of loan. My mother had called her sister, my aunt, who had told her no. My mother had called my father's brother, my uncle, who had told her no. My mother had called several of her friends. They had all told her no. She had not called me. I want to tell you why she did not call me. The reason matters. My mother had decided, 10 years earlier, after the wedding, that I had been quietly disappointed in her. She had not been wrong. I had been quietly disappointed in her for 10 years. The disappointment had not been a thing I had ever expressed out loud. I had simply, for 10 years, been less available. I had not gone to family dinners as often. I had not visited as often. I had not invited her to my apartment in Astoria for more than one short visit. I had been polite at every family event. I had not been warm. My mother had read the temperature change. She had decided, in her own private bookkeeping, that I was a lost cause as a daughter. She had decided that I was the kind of daughter who had grown up to be cold and who could not be counted on, and who would not have had the money anyway. Because conservators do not make a lot of money in most people's mental models. Even though I had been a senior conservator at a successful private studio for the previous 4 years and had been making real money for at least 3, she had not asked me. She had not even thought to ask me. The not thinking had been her final mistake. The closing was on a Tuesday morning in November. The closing was at the title company's office in a small commercial building in the town near Lake Mirror. The closing was scheduled for 10 in the morning. The seller's family, the doctor's adult children, had been the people on the other side of the transaction. They had been 3 siblings, in their 40s and 50s, who had inherited the house from their father and who had been ready to sell it. I had been told by my agent the previous Friday that one of the seller's children had been getting some last-minute pressure from a different potential buyer. The buyer had been calling the seller's agent multiple times, asking if the deal had closed yet, asking if she could make a competing offer even though the deal was already in escrow. The buyer had been my mother. She had not given up. She had, at some point in the previous month, somehow gotten my mother's hands on a cashier's check for $400,000. Which I would later learn was the result of her having taken out a home equity line of credit on her own house, against my father's wishes, which she had not actually been authorized to do because the line of credit required both their signatures. She had forged my father's signature on the application. She had been planning to use the $400,000 as a down payment and to take out a larger mortgage for the rest, with a partial bank loan she had pre-approved for at a small regional bank that had been less careful than they should have been. She had been planning, basically, to crash the closing. Her agent had told her that the seller's family had agreed to honor the existing contract. Her agent had told her that there was no legal way for her to insert herself. She had not accepted this. She had, on the morning of the closing, decided to come to the closing office anyway, with my father, with the cashier's check in her purse, with the idea that if she could just get into the room and talk to the sellers directly, she could make her case in person, and they would change their minds. I had not known any of this until that morning. My agent had heard a rumor. I had been told to expect that something might happen. I had been told to be ready. What happened was this. I arrived at the title company's office at 9:45. I sat in the small waiting room with Mateo. The seller's family arrived a few minutes later. We all said small polite things to each other. The closing began at exactly 10. We were almost through the bulk of the paperwork, with about 15 minutes remaining, when there was a commotion in the lobby. The receptionist, a young woman named Magdalena, came to the conference room door. She told us that 2 people had arrived in the lobby and were asking to be let into the closing. She told us they had said they were the buyers. She told us their names. She said the names were Renaud and Camilla Berenson. Renaud and Camilla Berenson were my parents. The closing attorney, a careful older man named Mr. Kekkonen, looked at me. He said, "Mrs. Berenson Vasquez, are these people authorized to be at this closing?" I told him no. I told him they were my parents. I told him they were not part of the transaction. I told him I had not invited them. Mr. Kekkonen turned to Magdalena. He said, "Please tell them this is a private closing. Please ask them to leave the building. If they refuse, please call the police." Magdalena nodded. She left the conference room. I want to tell you what happened in the next 90 seconds, because the seconds are the moment most of you came for, and I want to do them justice. I had told Mateo, the night before, that there was a chance my parents might show up. I had told him, if they did, that I wanted to handle it. He had agreed. I had stood up from the conference room table. I had told the Sellers family, very calmly, that I was sorry for the interruption, and that I would handle it, and that I would be back in 2 minutes. I had walked out of the conference room and into the lobby. My parents had been standing in the lobby. My mother had been holding a manila envelope in her hand. My father had been standing next to her, slightly behind her, looking like a man who had been talked into something and who was not entirely sure how he had gotten there. My mother saw me. She did not look surprised at first. She thought, I think, that I had come out to greet them. Then she saw my face. Then she saw the way I was dressed. I was in a navy suit. I had been at the closing. My face was the face of a person who was at the closing. She said, Yelena, what are you doing here? I said, Mom, I am in the middle of buying this house. I want to tell you what happened to her face. The face she had been wearing was the face of a woman who had been preparing for a different kind of conversation. The face I was now seeing was the face of a woman who was understanding, in real time, that the conversation she had been preparing for was not the conversation that was happening. She looked at me. She looked at my father. She looked back at me. She said, What? I said, I am buying the house. I have been buying it for the last 45 days. The closing is happening right now. I have to go back in. I cannot let you stay in this lobby. You are going to have to leave. I am sorry. I am genuinely sorry. I will call you next week. We will talk. But you cannot stay here today. My father was looking at me. He was looking at me with an expression I had never seen on his face before. It was an expression that was somewhere between recognition and grief. He looked, for the first time in a long time, like he was actually seeing me. He looked like he had finally noticed who I had grown up to be. My mother said, Yelena, we have been saving for this house for years. You knew this. You knew what this house meant. Mom, I said, I knew what the house meant. I have known what it meant my whole life. I knew you had been telling everybody you were going to buy it. I knew you had been telling them you had been saving. I knew that, like a lot of things you have told people, the saying had not been the saving. I knew that if this house ever came on the market, somebody else was going to buy it. I decided, 6 years ago, that the somebody else would be me. I have been quietly working toward this since I was 29. I am buying the house today. The house will be mine in about 15 minutes. My father took a small step forward. His knees buckled slightly. He did not collapse. He went down onto one knee, slowly, on the carpet of the title company's lobby, the way a man goes down when his body has stopped being able to hold him. He put one hand flat on the carpet to steady himself. He did not cry. He just sat there, on his knee, looking up at me. He said in the quietest voice I had ever heard him use, Yelena, I am sorry. Those were the first 3 honest words my father had said to me in 10 years. I want to tell you what I did with those 3 words. I crouched down on the carpet next to him. I did not hug him. I was not ready to hug him yet. I put my hand on his shoulder. I said, Dad, I know. We are going to talk later. I have to finish closing on the house right now. I will call you on Saturday. Get up. Take Mom home. Please do not make a scene. The Sellers are nice people. They have been waiting for 41 years to sell this house. They have grandchildren. They have other things to do today. Please go home. My dad nodded. He stood up slowly, with effort. My mom was looking at the floor. She was not crying yet. She would cry later. The crying was not yet ready to come. They left the building. I went back to the conference room. I closed on the house at 10:38. I signed the deed. I signed the mortgage. I shook the Sellers family's hands. I drove to the house with Mateo that afternoon. I walked through the rooms my mother had described to me my whole life. I sat on the porch where my great-grandmother had once sat. I made a cup of tea on the small stove. I had bought back, by myself, the house my mother had been telling everybody she was going to buy back, while she had not been actually saving the money to do it. I want to tell you what happened in the year since, because the year is the part of the story that has been more complicated than the closing. My mother did not speak to me for 4 months. I did not push. My father called me on the second Saturday after the closing, the way he had said he would, although I had been the one to call him. We had a long, quiet conversation on the phone. He told me he had not known about the line of credit on the house. He told me he had not known my mother had forged his signature. He told me he was going to handle it. He had handled it. He had filed for legal separation from my mother 3 months later, after a long process of his own. They have been living separately since. They are not divorced yet. They may not divorce. The arrangement is something they are still figuring out. Liora called me about 6 weeks after the closing. She had been told the version of events my mother had wanted her to hear. She had then been told the actual version by a cousin who had been at the title company office that day, who had heard the story from a friend who worked at the firm. She called me to apologize. She apologized for the shower. She apologized for 10 years of having been the favored daughter without ever once asking what that favor had cost me. She apologized for her wedding, which had also been larger than mine, although I had not even thought to bring up that detail in years. We talked for almost 3 hours on the phone that day. We have been talking regularly since. My niece, who is now 10, has been spending a few weekends a year at the lake house with me and Mateo. She loves the porch. I have not told my mother she can come to the lake house. She has not asked. I do not know if she ever will. I want to tell you what I have learned, because I think this may be useful to somebody listening. When somebody in your family takes from you in a small or quiet way, and you do not respond, the not responding is not the failure. The not responding can be the most useful thing you do, if you decide what to do next with what they have shown you. The taking is information. The taking is the family telling you, in the only language they have been willing to use, what you actually are to them. You can argue with the taking. You can leave a long note about it. You can confront the family at the next holiday dinner. None of those things tend to work, because the family already knows what they did. They are not going to be persuaded by your account of it. The family is going to keep doing what they're going to keep doing, and the only real question is whether you let what they have shown you become information you act on. If you decide to act on the information, you do not have to act loudly. You do not have to announce. You do not have to write the long note or confront anybody at any holiday dinner. You can simply, quietly, start saving. You can simply, quietly, start paying attention to what the family has been saying it cared about. You can simply, quietly, over years if you have to, start positioning yourself to be the person who gets to do the thing the family had been failing to do for itself. Conservation work has taught me this. The damage in a painting is not undone in a single afternoon. The damage is sat with, looked at, understood, and then very carefully addressed, over months, with small interventions that the painting does not even register at first. The painting comes back, eventually, to a version of itself that contains the history of the damage but is not defined by it. Your life can do the same. The taking your family did to you is the damage. Your life is the painting. You are the conservator. Take your time. You will know when the moment has arrived to do the careful intervention. The moment will arrive on a Tuesday morning in November, in a small commercial building near a lake, when somebody you love has tried to crash a closing and has ended up on his knees in a lobby. The moment will arrive when you have been building, quietly, for the years it takes to build, and the building has finally produced something the family did not predict. The moment is the win. The waiting before the moment is also the win. The whole thing is the win. The family will figure out, eventually, that you have been the conservator the entire time, and they will not always like what you have done with the painting, but the painting will not be theirs anymore. It will be yours. I want to ask you something before you go. Tell me, in the comments, the moment you realized your family had been taking something quiet from you and had been counting on your silence to keep doing it. Tell me how old you were. Tell me what they took. Tell me whether you said anything at the time, or whether you, like me, said nothing for a long time. Tell me what you have been quietly building since. Tell me whether you have used what you have built yet, or whether you are still in the building part. There are more of us in the building part than the families who have been quietly taking from us would ever guess. We have been finding each other for years, in conservation studios and in apartment kitchens and in small commercial buildings near lakes. Tell me yours. I will be reading every single comment. I will see you in the next one.